want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Bumray here again for JOBLO.com with another video edition of The Good, The Bad, and The Badass. And this week we're taking a look at the Austrian oak himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, it disturbs me that a young generation of fanboys are looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger like some kind of camp icon. Let me get one thing straight, people. Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't a Chuck Norris, okay? He's as legit as they come. While people like Norris may have slaved away in a series of B-movie actioners, the vast majority of which don't hold up today, Arnold made more than a few classics, and don't you even dare to compare him to somebody like Steven Seagal. Steven Seagal is a flea on Arnold Schwarzenegger's ass. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the man. Okay? For a while, Arnold Schwarzenegger was legitimately the biggest star in the world. He was such a big star, they let him be governor of California just because he was Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator. Nobody could say no to him. He wasn't even born in America, and for a while, you know what? It looked like he could become president. You know why? Because he's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Even the lesser movies that he made during his peak period, which runs from about 1982's Conan the Barbarian to 1996's Eraser, are actually amazing. So, let's not give Arnold Schwarzenegger any shit.
Trust me.
Now, in his prime, Arnold Schwarzenegger was indeed the biggest star in the world. He worked with huge budgets, with both Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and True Lies setting records for being the most expensive movies of all time when they came out, and the very best directors, including James Cameron, John Mctiernan, who they're not allowing to make movies for some reason anymore, and Paul Verhoeven. Plus top-notch supporting cast with actors like James Caan, Jamie Lee Curtis, James Belushi. Well, okay. James Belushi's actually pretty good, so yeah, I'll give him a pass. Danny DeVito, amazing. A lot of people, okay? He's the best. Now, I've always been a huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. It all goes back to the year 1988. There were two big Christmas movies that year. One of them was Cocoon the Return, the other was Twins, and for some reason I wanted to see Cocoon the Return. Luckily, my parents didn't want to see Cocoon the Return, and when they took us to a movie theater, they took me to see Twins. Pretty much forced me to watch it with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. And you know what? I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And from then on, I was the biggest fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger that you could possibly imagine.
We're twins.
That's right.
Twins. Coming this Christmas.
When I was in elementary school, we had to do a biography of people that we admire. Being in Canada, you had a lot of people writing biographies of someone like Terry Fox, who of course is very admirable, and, religious figures like Cardinal Leger, being in a French-Canadian-based school. However, I wrote mine about Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was something that was very confusing for my dad to explain to a lot of his friends on the force. He was a cop, by the way, when he had to make a bunch of photocopies of Arnold Schwarzenegger bodybuilding photos, which I needed for my biography. This was the days before the internet, and you know what? A photocopier was pretty rare. And I think a lot of people at my dad's work just thought he was obsessed with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wasn't. I was obsessed with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, sorry, Dad.
Who is your daddy, and what does he do?
Now, things kind of went downhill for Arnold Schwarzenegger after 1997's Batman and Robin. That movie sunk a couple of careers, but none of them seemed to suffer as much as Arnold Schwarzenegger did. And indeed, he became less and less interested in movies, focusing on his political career, becoming the governor of California for 2 terms, before eventually returning to films, and I gotta say, his return to films has not been the best. Perhaps as a result of his polarizing political career, let's not forget he was a Republican, and a fairly conservative one at times. And advancing age, Arnold Schwarzenegger struggled somewhat to re-establish himself as an action hero. But you know what? He's still giving it a go, with Terminator Dark Fate opening up and giving him pretty good reviews. In fact, probably the best reviews that he's had since he stopped being governor of California.
For the people to win, politics as usual must lose.
Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger's career is an interesting one. He first blasted onto the scene as a bodybuilder in the documentary Pumping Iron, and he got little bit parts in movies like The Villain, opposite Kirk Douglas and Anne Margaret, and even showed up in a bit part as a muscle man in The Long Goodbye with Elliot Gould. However, Arnold Schwarzenegger was never taken seriously until John Milius's 1982 epic Conan the Barbarian. Now, of course, he has almost no dialogue in the movie, but boy oh boy is it ever a showcase for his physique. What really set his career on fire was Terminator, which was, I think, probably still his his most iconic role, but what's interesting is that after Terminator, he finally got to play some good guys in movies like Commando, which I think kind of opened him up to a family-friendly persona that he hadn't really had before. Throughout the 80s, he did a lot of these movies. Movies like The Running Man, Predator, which mix sci-fi, action, and horror together in an amazing way. Plus, the detours into comedy, which were the envy of every action hero of the era. I mean, Twins and Kindergarten Cop were both huge hits. Sylvester Stallone tried his hand at comedy and it almost broke him. Arnold Schwarzenegger, however, managed to pull it off. Now, the only time Arnold Schwarzenegger's career ever really suffered was in 1993, when he did The Last Action Hero, which is, let's just call it, misguided. Although that said, I really don't think it's as bad a movie as people seem to think it is.
He's fantastic. This is his best performance ever.
Now, for me, Arnold Schwarzenegger's best role, his most iconic role ever, is, of course, the T-800. Now, together with James Cameron, Arnold took what could have been a 2-bit B-movie villain and made him something really transcendent. Arnold was so popular as the Terminator, which we should remember was just a modestly budgeted indie, that when it came time for the blockbuster sequel, the T-800 went from being an iconic figure of terror to one of pure goodness in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, with his absolute devotion to John Connor and his touching self-sacrifice, bringing a tear to the eye of many a jaded action fan. Now, when it gets to Arnold Schwarzenegger's most overrated roles, this one's actually kind of hard. Fact is, I love most of his movies from this era. Now, for me, the only Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from the mid-80s on into the 90s that I'd say wasn't great was probably Raw Deal. Now, this was kind of one of the few quickie actioners that he actually made, and he had to do it for Dino De Laurentiis, who bankrolled the Conan movies. He's a very odd choice for this film in that he plays a small-town sheriff and a former FBI agent who goes undercover in the mob. For 3/4 of the movie, it's like a Scorsese ripoff with Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a role that seems like it was written for Robert De Niro. Looks kind of ridiculous in these sharp Armani suits amongst the mafiosos. It's also curiously short on action, and worse still is the fact that after 70-odd minutes of Arnold Schwarzenegger building a case against the mob, rather than, actually using the evidence, he simply pops the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction into his car stereo and goes on an absolute rampage. Even worse, the rampage is so awesome that you resent the rest of the movie for being so dull in comparison, even if it doesn't make a lick of sense. Now, it's not a terrible movie because it's kind of fun in a cheesy way, but it's one of Arnie's few missteps during this peak period. Another one of which I would say is probably Conan the Destroyer. To make Conan into a PG-rated family film was a disastrous idea. That said, I think Conan the Destroyer is so obscure now, nobody really remembers it, at least compared to the original. Now, when we're talking about underrated Arnold Schwarzenegger roles, he's done a lot of movies that I would call underrated. For me, one of the ones that most people ignore is Eraser. Now, this is a slickly made actioner that actually marked the end of Arnold's golden period, with it quote-unquote underperforming at the box office, making only $100 million in 1996 dollars, which would be a blockbuster nowadays, but back then was considered a disappointment because his movies were making double or triple that. Directed by Chuck Russell, it's a pretty solid film on its own with a smarter than average story and some great direction by Chuck Russell. Now, the CGI has aged really badly and some of the one-liners are cheesy, but it's also got some pretty cool moments, such as when he shoots a CGI alligator and says,
Your luggage.
Eraser is full of really great set pieces, such as the scientifically impossible but kind of amazing airplane shootout and the finale with Arnold Schwarzenegger's 2 railguns. It's kind of a great flick. Now, for me, Arnold Schwarzenegger's most memorable scene is a no-brainer. It's the police station massacre in The Terminator, where he says,
I'll be back.
A line which became such a trademark that it showed up in all of his movies for about 20 years, even though he wasn't playing the Terminator.
I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back.
I'll be right back.
I'll be back.
I might be back.
I'm back. She'll be back.
I'm back. I'm back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back. Ha! You did not gonna say that, did you?
That's what you always say.
Now, if we're talking about Arnold's best movies, I believe his top 5 movies are so. At number 5 comes True Lies. If you watch this movie now, it's a little un-PC, and it's oddly been out of circulation probably for about 20 years at this point, which is a shame because I think it's a really fun, well-done film. I love Jamie Lee Curtis in it, Schwarzenegger's amazing, and for sure it could have made a cool franchise. Alas, it never happened. James Cameron got busy with Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and the blue folks in Avatar. Can't blame him.
You're fired.
Number 4 is John McTiernan's Predator, kind of a perfect little sci-fi action movie. It's a really neat mix of action and horror, and I think Arnold Schwarzenegger has one of his best parts as Dutch, the badass platoon leader who, at the end, has to go mano a mano with the Predator with his bare hands, stripped from all of his ammunition. And also it has one of my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liners ever, where he throws a machete, which impales a guy to a wall, and then he says,
Stick around.
Number 3 is probably one of my favorite movies of all time, Total Recall, directed by Paul Verhoeven, which I think still holds the record for the most grotesque body count of all time. Now, the scene where he fights Michael Ironside in the elevator, takes his arms off, is a classic. The score by Jerry Goldsmith is absolutely insane. Sharon Stone is blindingly hot, and this movie, from start to finish, is just a blast. I don't know why Len Wiseman ever thought he could remake it with Colin Farrell of all people. What a disaster. The original is absolutely amazing. The top 2 on this list have to go to the Terminator movies. It's a squeaker for number 1 here. Number 2 for me has to be the original Terminator. I know that a lot of people would put this first, but for me, there's just something about Terminator 2 Judgment Day that does it for me and edges it out somewhat for the top spot. The Terminator on its own, though, is an absolutely amazing little action flick done at a relatively low budget with some great performance by Arnold Schwarzenegger, as well as really strong acting by Michael Biehn and the great Linda Hamilton, who really comes into her own in Terminator 2 Judgment Day as the new badass Sarah Connor, who's all jacked and ready for action, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the good T-800. It should not have worked, but it works amazingly. And of course, he has really good chemistry with Edward Furlong and some great lines, including one of the best.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger seems to be calling it a day a little bit with Terminator Dark Fate, which is in some ways the bookend to his career, although he's teasing at perhaps coming back in something like a TV series, which would be cool to see. I'd love to see Arnold Schwarzenegger get some great material, and when he tries to act in legitimate films, he can be really good. He was really good in this kind of zombie movie that nobody saw called Maggie, opposite Abigail Breslin, and also really good in a film called Aftermath. Of course, nobody saw those movies. People like to stick to the legend that he's a bad actor, but let me tell you, Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a bad actor, and in fact can be amazing when he puts himself into it. So for JOBLO.com, I'm Chris Bumbray, admitted Arnold Schwarzenegger superfan, and you know what? All of you watching, you're superfans too. Till the next time, Chris Bumbray for JOBLO.com.